we've been discussing that the whole objective of creation, besides being a beneficiary of one's own choice, the only creation which has choice to go in either direction, to do good or evil, is the human being. And if we choose to do the right thing, then we are beneficiaries and worthy of the ultimate. To have a relationship with God, which is the source of everything. You know, it's interesting. We read in Pirkei Avos, Schar v'ayal maleko, that when you do a mitzvah, you cannot be rewarded in this world. Now the question is, why not? So you'd say because a mitzvah, it has a spiritual edge to it. The result of a mitzvah is spiritual, and the world being finite, therefore, this world doesn't have a capacity to be able to what? To be rewarded in this world, because there's not enough life. The human being doesn't have enough of a capacity to receive the value of what a mitzvah is, because it's spiritual. That's simple. Let's talk even more than that. When you are worthy of a share in the world to come, what is the world to come? World to come means you have a relationship with God. And based on the degree of quality of that mitzvah, that will determine what relationship you have with God. And being exposed to Him and being attached to Him, that is considered the ultimate, because God is absolute. So if you have relevance to the absolute, which is infinite, it's something that what? There's nothing, it's not to be understood what that is. That's the whole concept of the world to come. If God Himself is infinite, and the world to come means you have a relationship with the infinite, that is the reward. So that means it's not just it's spiritual, because spiritual is not finite, but the question is, why is it not finite? An angel is finite. An angel is finite. It may be not fathomable what the dimension of the angel is, but an angel is finite within the spiritual realm. A person who has a share in the world to come, he's greater than the angel because he's attached to the infinite. The angel is not attached to the infinite. If we exercise the power of choice to do the right thing, and that itself is what is reflecting God's profile, that we are deserving unto ourselves, not due to any external being, because we're deserving, because we ourselves took the initiative to achieve whatever we achieved. The angel is an angel because God created the angel. Like God created heaven and earth, God created the species, God created the angel. So the angel has no relevance to himself. He is because that's the way God created him. The person has a share in the world to come. He has a share in the world to come because he assumed the profile of God, that it was due to his own initiative. He achieved what he achieved. And what he achieved was a worthiness to be associated, attached to God. So if that is the case, what do you have relevance to? You have relevance to what? If you're attached to God, to the infinite. Something infinite, you cannot reward, has no relevance to anything which has relevance to finite. There's no such thing. Because the result of your initiative that you chose to do the will of God, that makes you worthy to have a relationship with Him. That is the reward. Who is He? He's infinite. As a result of that, it's impossible for one to receive reward in this world if this world would be endlessly broader than it is. Doesn't make a difference. Person will live 10,000 years. It's irrelevant because that's finite. Whatever this world is, it's finite. The angel is finite. The Jew is not finite because the Jew being God's people and having a relevance to the world to come, as we say, Kol Yisrael yesh lo b'chelik l'mabah. Every Jew has the ability to attach himself to God, but you have to take many initiatives to be worthy of that. But if you do, what you achieved is association with the infinite. Therefore, you can't be rewarded in this world. But that's choice. What is the infinite? What is God? God is everything. If you make the right choice, you have relevance to the infinite. But what is the infinite? God is the creator. God could create things which, within the context of rational understanding, is impossible to fathom. Good and evil. How could good and evil emanate from the same source? Not understandable. But if you understand that everything emanates from God, and it's not from different sources, then it's not difficult to understand, not how it works, to understand it's all from him. And there's nothing beyond him because he's everything. And that's what we spoke about, the Yichud Hashem, the unity of God. Everything comes from him. Now let's go back to the very beginning. Pre-existence, what existed? Nothing. What is nothing? Nothing doesn't mean something we visualize. It's not a vacuum. It's not devastation. It's not emptiness, because all that's part of creation. Pre-existent, nothing existed means the only thing that existed pre-existence was only God himself. Could you describe God? You can't. It's impossible to describe or to write what God is, because he's infinite. God willed existence, which is called ex nihilo. From nothing, something came about. There's nothing, all of a sudden the world comes about. That's called ex nihilo. In the words of the Midrash, it's yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing. How do you create something from nothing? Only God could do that. So if you believe that what pre-existed existence, there was no existence at any level, that itself is Yichud Hashem. You believe God is the creator. Believing God is the creation. We find two terminologies mentioned in the portion of Bereshis, first portion Torah. There's Vayivra, God created, and God formed. What's creation? What's formation? Creation is ex nihilo. Formation means taking what exists and coalescing it, and forming it, combining it to develop whatever you have to develop. Creation is ex nihilo. So if you believe God created the world, that means nothing existed prior to God's willing it. That is Yichud Hashem. You're actually taking on the position you believe everything comes from God. Everything is God. Okay, now we find that there's a verse the Medrash quotes that God could extract light from darkness. Could you extract light from darkness? It's an impossibility. What is an example of light from darkness? Avram from Terach was light from darkness. Terach represented, there wasn't a shred of purity or holiness in him. And he had a son, Avram. So that's light from darkness. That is an example of ex nihilo. Ex nihilo. Avram had to take an initiative. What was Avram's initiative, which we discussed? He asked questions, and nobody were able to respond to his questions. But he didn't turn the question into the answer, which is a human trait. If you have a question, evidently it must be. No, he stayed with the question. His quest for truth was so perfect, he was not willing to compromise his standard of truth. As a result of that, God says to him, I am the source of everything. So Avram, understanding who God is, that came about, that was ex nihilo. Avram had no relevance to that. No human being had relevance to that. So Avram is the equivalent of light from darkness. God endowed Avram with an understanding of himself, which is the equivalent of light from darkness. It had nothing to do with his father. That's ex nihilo. Now, what was the Sinai event? The Sinai event was God put us under a mountain. God says, do you want to accept my Torah? We said, yes. Then God puts us under a mountain. He gives us an ultimatum. Either you accept and embrace my Torah in its entirety, otherwise you're going to be buried under the mountain. And what did we say? Okay, if it's a question, he's going to pull the plug on existence, or we continue, we agree to continue. The receiving of the Torah Sinai is considered under coercion. We were compelled, we were coerced to accept the Torah. What happened on Purim, what happened on Purim? Haman, who is the personification of Amalek, Amalekites, he was able to extract a decree from the Persian emperor to annihilate every man, woman, and child in the world. Ahasuerus, the Persian emperor, ruled the world supreme. There was no location in the world that he did not control. The decree to annihilate every man, woman, and children was issued in all his provinces. So there was no way a Jew could escape this decree. And the decree was that every man, woman, and child should be annihilated. And they were going to annihilate us. What happened at the last moment? If you read the narrative of the story of Purim, all of a sudden, Esther has a party for her husband. Haman is at the party, and he says to his wife, I'm willing to give you half of my kingdom. What do you want? He says, I'll tell you what I want. There was a decree that was issued. He says, I wouldn't bother the king. But since there was an issued decree by an evil man to annihilate every man, woman, and child, I'm asking you to save myself and save my people. He says, what are you talking about? He says, I'm talking about Haman. It was due to him. He issued a decree to annihilate every Jew, man, woman, and child. Ahasuerus becomes livid, becomes furious, and becomes incensed. He storms out of the room. He comes back, and he finds Haman falls on the bed where Esther is lying. He says, do you mean to say you have the audacity and the arrogance that you're going to go and take my wife in the presence of the king? So there was a man named Charvona. He says, by the way, he has a gallows 50 cubits high. He built for Mordechai the Jew. Ahasuerus says, take him, hang him on that gallows. Immediately, he went from the heights of power into the oblivion in a moment. And what happens? For the first time, Ahasuerus realizes Esther, his wife, the queen, is a Jew, a Jewess. And she introduces him to her uncle, Mordechai. Mordechai now becomes the viceroy of the Persian Empire. And all of a sudden, he overturns the decree that the Jews have a right to kill the Amalekites on the 13th day of Adar. In a moment, the world was turned upside down. How's this possible? We were at the brink of extinction. We were meant to be destroyed, annihilated, not a trace of a Jew. In one moment, God turns over the world. And those who want to annihilate us, we annihilate them. But we only had permission for a 24-hour period. What happened? The Jews, as a result of what happened, they reaffirmed their connection to Torah. They accepted the Torah out of love, because when they saw how much they meant to God, that God allowed them to believe that they were at a point of no return, hopelessness, impossible. God says, you will survive. Not only will you survive and thrive, you will destroy your enemy. Those who want, so the Jew says, you know something? We see God's love for us. We accept the Torah out of love. It's no longer we're being compelled. It's not because God took us out of Egypt and he's our master and we don't have much of a choice. Like a subject servant has no choice but to follow the words of the dictate of the master. That's not it. We truly see that our master, what he dictates to us is out of love, as he saved us at this moment from extinction at the last moment. That tells us he truly loves us, that will turn the world upside down. But we can only appreciate that, look through that lens, undergoing, believing it's over. And therefore there's reaffirmation of the acceptance of Torah out of love. That's the story of Purim. But what does that say? What did the Jews see? You know what the Jews saw? God controls existence. Because they were at a point believing it's irretrievable, it's not reconcilable. There's no way to survive. Impossible. God says, when it comes to me, there's no impossible. Impossible is within the human context. Within God's vernacular, there's no impossible, because he's the basis for everything. As a result of that, when they saw that clearly, there was a reaffirmation of the acceptance of Torah out of love. But that they accepted. What was that? That's the ultimate declaration of Yichud Hashem. They recognized everything is God. It's the closest thing to what we ever came to since Adam. When Adam had an understanding, everything is God, they came to understand everything is God. Therefore, they accepted the Torah. What's the Torah? The Torah is the lens, the medium through which, despite all the concealment of God, you're able to see God in this concealment. It was an upgrade. It was a qualitative upgrade of the Torah. Therefore, we merit another level of spiritual infusion that all of a sudden we see things differently. We're able to process things differently. Now, so that was the ultimate. Purim is Yichud Hashem, is the unity of God at the most advanced level. There's a story in the prophets that there was a king, his name was Chizkiyahu, the king of Judah. And there was a king, he was the king of the Assyrians, his name was Sancheriv. He already had exiled the 10 tribes. The 10 lost tribes were exiled by this Assyrian king. There were 3 tribes who were not exiled yet. And he came to destroy the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, and he was going to destroy the Jewish people and exile them. It was the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Leviim and the Kohanim, this one tribe. And he had amassed literally 1 million troops around Yerushalayim. And he goes, he's on top of the hill, and he looks down and he sees this little community called Jerusalem. And he says to his generals, this is what they're talking about. I've conquered cities which were endlessly larger than this. You know, something you can wait till tomorrow morning. There's no rush. I could blow it over. It's nothing. It's meaningless. That night, he goes to sleep. All his 1 million troops go to sleep. It was comprised of many nations. God says to Gabriel, the archangel, who's known as the angel of justice, he says, take your sickle, your sword, and I want you to annihilate the whole camp of Sancheriv. In one swoop, every member of the camp, except for Sancheriv, was wiped out. They were incinerated. One swoop. Why did they merit this? Why did the Jews merit such a miracle? Chizkiyahu didn't have to lift the finger. Because Chizkiyahu, the king of Judah, his father was an evil man, was an idolater. And when he became king, he says to the Jewish people, there's a new mandate. New mandate. You know what the mandate is? He gathers all the Jews together, and he takes a Sefer Torah, and he has a sword. And he says, he gives them an ultimatum. And he says to every Jew, man, woman, and child, either you live by the Torah, or you're going to be pierced by the sword. Meaning you have no choice. Either you all change, or it's over. Within 2.5 years, every woman and child, from Dan to Beersheba, were proficient in all those laws of spiritual purity. He turned the world upside down. In 2.5 years, he revamped the Jewish people. The Jewish people were engaged in Torah at a level which was unheard of. In the merit of the oil burning, that's meaning they studied late into the night. That's why God performed this miracle. So because Chizkiyahu, king of Judah, was so special, you know what Hashem said? Ultimately, the Messiah has to come, and you have Armageddon. I would like that Sancheriv, who came to destroy the Jewish people, they are the Armageddon, and they were destroyed. And Chizkiyahu, the king of Judah, he will be Mashiach, and he will proclaim my presence in the world, and all evil will come to an end through him. Seems to be okay. And God wanted it that he should be Mashiach. The attribute of justice comes to God and says, you know something? He doesn't deserve to be Mashiach. Why? Because after witnessing such a miracle, he should have said Shira. He should have sung song. As Moshe Rabbeinu, after the splitting of the sea, he articulated through praises of God, Chizkiyahu, the king of Judah, he should have said, similarly, he should have sang a song articulating to Jewish people to appreciate God's power. And since he did not, he's not worthy to be Mashiach. You know what God says? He's not Mashiach. This story goes back to the end of the first temple period. So because he did not say Shira, God says he's not Mashiach. What's the claim? First, look, why didn't he say Shira? Why did he not sing the song? You want to know something? If you read the Torah says that if you follow my statutes and you dedicate it to Torah, your enemies will fall before you. He figured there's no point. What do I have to sing Shira? If everybody sees the sun shining, it's understood the sun is shining. Therefore, he felt it wasn't necessary, but that wasn't the point. If he would have said Shira, you know what Shira is? That's articulating the unity of God. What happened was the unity of God, which is the ultimate purpose of existence, that all Jews should recognize that. All humanity should recognize that. If he would have said Shira, he would have articulated that reality. So because he had the ability to do that, he did not, although he understood it. It's not God for it, he didn't understand it. But for all mankind to have it in writing, the articulation of the unity of God, which should have been expressed through that song, to understand what happened with the millions of enemy being wiped out in one swoop, he failed on the most important point. If the objective of creation is yichud, is the unity of God, and this demonstrates that, how do you not articulate it? And because of that, that's why he wasn't Mashiach. Because that's exactly what Mashiach will do. He will articulate, give us an understanding how every nuance, and from that we understand in retrospect that there's nothing that happens in existence which is not God's will. The Talmud tells us in one location, Cleopatra. Talmud speaks about Cleopatra. She asked one of the great rabbis at the Talmud, and these are questions that bother her. Listen to the question. She was amazed about a number of things. When a person is buried with shrouds, clothed, at the time of resurrection, not that she believed in it, according to the Jews' version of resurrection, when the Jew or whoever is worthy, are they to be resurrected in the naked state or in a clothed state? Yeah, this is Cleopatra's, this is her question, because that's exactly what she was all about. Clothed or naked? Why is it such an important question? For her, that was an important question. So the rabbi says, if you take a kernel of wheat and put it in the ground, and the kernel grows into a stalk of wheat, when you put it in the ground, there's no husk, there's no chaff, there's no coverings. So here, the kernel of wheat you put in the ground, it's stripped, has nothing. And when it grows out of the ground, fully developed, what is it? It has all kinds of coverings on it. So the Jew, when he goes into the ground, he goes in with shrouds. And he comes out, when he goes in clothed, there's no question when he comes out, he's going to be clothed. To be in that respectful state. That's one question she asked. Another question she asked, another observation says, I'm amazed. Every species, which is not the human being, walks on four. When it carries its fetus, where does the fetus lie? On the flank. On the flank of the animal. The laws of gravity, it weighs down. As a result of that, that's the reason why the fetus in utero doesn't fall out of the mother. The human being stands vertically. The fetus is in the womb. Based on laws of gravity, the child, the unborn fetus, should fall out of the body. And yet it doesn't. She says, I'm amazed. Yeah, that's what she's amazed about. Amazed. Another thing she's amazed about, what fertilizes an ovum? This colorless fluid goes onto the ovum. So you have a grayish or light fluid, which is liquid consistency. And when it fertilizes the ovum, unbelievable things happen. A child develops, their bones, there's sinew, there's blood, there's flesh, there's hair, their eyes, which have colors, the pupil, the retina, all this. It's unbelievable. How from one fluid you have all these multiple results, different textures, different functions. How's it possible? She's amazed at this wonder. From fertilization till birth, it's something not to fathom. It's like more than the 7 wonders of existence. These are her observations. But how does it happen? How? Well, it happens. You know what the answer is? Because God willed it should happen. That's how it happens. The answer to everything. If you go into the ground and you decompose, and when it comes time to be resurrected, what bother, are you naked or you clothed? So the answer, he drew a lesson from the kernel of wheat. But how does the person decompose and come alive again, fully developed, with being clothed? How? You know what the answer is? Because there's nothing beyond God's will, because everything is God's will. That's Yichud Hashem. So believing in resurrection, what are you believing in? It's all about God. Everything is God. What is, it's because he wills it to be. And what's not is because he wills it not to be. And he should will it to be again, it comes about. So all these beliefs we have, and that's the 13 tenets of Jewish belief. If you believe in every one of them, you believe everything is God. That is Yichud Hashem. And the more you engage in it, you reflect on it, and you actualize it through the Torah and the mitzvos, that turns it into more of a reality. Because that spiritualizes ourselves, that we have a capacity to internalize it, and it becomes a reality. You know, there's an expression in Yiddish, but the translation is, God runs the show. That's it. God runs the world. The world is, God runs the world. How? This, that. God runs the world. That's it. That's what it's all about. Nothing happens unless God wills it should be the way it happens. So all these various things we pointed out, that the Jews came to a realization of Purim. And they came to realization that the Torah that he gave us was due to his love. And he demonstrated that love. Because we could have gone to the oblivion in a moment, to extinction, and we did not. If that's the case, we embrace it. That we saw initially as a burden, no, this is what it's all about. Only through that, we understand it's in our best interest. We may not understand, as he said, we may not understand, but we know. There's understanding, there's knowing. I know it. Do I understand why? Only God understands why. Why these particular protocols or mediums bring about that result and others don't. You know, if you put on tefillin and you meet certain criteria, it generates unbelievable levels of spirituality. But if you take a wooden box, or you take those same leather boxes, you don't put the parchments in, the way it's prescribed by the Torah, it doesn't work. It doesn't function. It's like you have a computer, you don't connect it to the energy source, it doesn't work. Or you have something, you have to put a battery in it. You don't put the battery, it doesn't tell time. That's the way it is. God created the system. That's the way the system works. But believing that, understanding that, that's Yichud Hashem. And that's the objective of creation, that every moment we realize and understand it's all him, it's not us. And every moment we say the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And if you understand what Echad means, it's all him. Everything emanates from him. Good, bad, evil, success, failing, it's all him. So, and, you know, if you believe in this, person goes to work and he fails. What does he do? Does he get depressed? Does he assume an inferiority complex? No. You gave it your best. It's not due to your not taking sufficient initiative. God didn't want you to succeed. Very simple. It's like the man who wins the lottery, the man who doesn't win the lottery. Why did he win it? It's not pot luck. It's not random, because God wanted he should win it. The one who didn't win it, God didn't want him to win it. Just end with a famous story, as I say, famous if you know it. There was a great tzaddik who came to Yerushalayim in the 1860s, passed away in the 20s. His name was Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. Very great tzaddik. Came from Hungary, and he moved into the ancient city, in the old community of Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. He was a holy man, great Torah sage. And in the 1800s, late 1800s, Jews were starving in Yerushalayim. There's no income, and literally they lived on nothing. And he bought an Austrian lottery ticket. He had whatever it's called, a lira. That was the currency. And he bought the lottery ticket for 4 lira, which wasn't much. And you could win, if you win the Austrian lottery, you win 100,000 golden guldens, 100,000 guldens, gold. Phenomenal amount of money. And he buys it. And it reached a point, he realized he has to sell the ticket because he needs bread to feed his family, otherwise they're going to die of starvation. So there was a certain person who was a pharmacist in Yerushalayim by the name of Goldschmidt. And he says to this Dr. Goldschmidt, who was an observant Jew, that he has to sell this ticket. Does he want to buy it? And he'll sell it to him for what he paid for it. So he sold him for 4 lira. And with this, he buys bread and he feeds his family. Lo and behold, they draw the ticket. Whose ticket wins? Dr. Goldschmidt's. The ticket that the great rabbi had, who had sold for 4 lira, he wins the jackpot, 100,000 golden coins, golden gulden. Phenomenal. So this pharmacist was such a devout, honest person of integrity. He goes to the rabbi, he says, I want to split it with you. You take 50,000, I'll take 50,000. He says, it was your ticket. It's only right that you take 50% of the win. That's what he says to the rabbi. So he says, why? Because it was your ticket. You deserve, at least you sold it, but you deserve 50% because it was your ticket. It's only because of your hardship you sold it. So rabbi says to this pharmacist, I want to explain you something. The ticket doesn't win, the man wins. It's the person that wins. It's not the ticket. If I would have had the ticket, I wouldn't have won. But because you had the ticket, that's why you won. It's the man who wins. It's not the ticket that wins. And that's what it's all about. Why? Because that's what God wants. Because God calls the shots. God wills existence to be as he chooses to will existence. When I possess it, I fail. When he possesses it, he succeeds. That was the punchline. That's what he told him. There's a certain person who started a certain bagel shop in Lakewood. It should have succeeded. Phenomenal success. Failed. Somebody bought the bagel shop for a pittance. He ran the shop exactly the same way. It thrives. He can't produce enough bagels in a day to supply his clientele. He had to open another bagel shop, and he expanded it. When A had the shop, couldn't make ends meet. He was operating at a loss. Sells it, then the person is operating in the black, beyond the black. What's it all about? Same business, same clientele. You have it. It's this way. He has it something else. Why? It's not the ticket. It's not the shop. It's the person. And that's the reality of that. But that's Yichud Hashem. That is God willing existence. It's not you're lucky, he's not lucky. There's no such thing as just luck. You're born under that star because God puts you under that star. And that's the way your life manifests itself. But why? As they say, only God knows. We don't understand, but we know. What do we know? Only God knows and only God wills.